It's finally here. The day is finally here. We finally, at long last, get to finish up all of our team previews for 2024, 2025. Today is, I say with zero enthusiasm, the Brooklyn Nets. Ugh. Ah, well. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Vespris, your gracious host. Thank you so much to all of you that continue to hit that like button and subscribe button and drop those reviews. We are growing like a weed. I presume weeds grow very quickly. I don't know. Everything's dying out here in Los Angeles at the moment. It's 1,000 degrees. But it's because of you guys that people are continuing to find the show. And I would say in particular, folks that had followed me on the old feed for so long, that didn't know that I have a new one. So thank you for helping spread the word, and thank you for continuing to do so. The Brooklyn Nets are arguably, maybe I should even say inarguably, the most annoying team to handicap for fantasy basketball for this coming season, for a couple of key reasons. Number one, we know that they're going into a rebuild, but they haven't gone all the way into the rebuild yet. Maybe that's that is really the reason. So Mikal Bridges is gone. They brought in Bojan Bogdanovic in that deal, but presumably he's not part of the future, but is he part of the we need to remain like within striking distance while losing type of plans? Perhaps. We also know Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith are very much on the trade block, but they haven't been moved yet, and trades are complicated. Sometimes teams just take the L in trades to speed up the rebuild. I would argue that even if you, in the moment, maybe seem like a little bit of a clown as a GM taking the L, speeding up the rebuild is very much the way to go. A recent example of that would be the Orlando Magic, who got rid of Aaron Gordon, Vooch. I think they cut Terrence Ross. Who am I forgetting? The Magic jettisoned everybody all at once. They were just like, this team's not good. This team's ceiling is capped out at, the very, very bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff standings, and sometimes we miss them anyway. So here, everybody gone. Get out of here. We don't really care that all we got back really was Wendell Carter Jr., who's fine, but, come on. An example of a team that has gone the other direction on this would be the Chicago Bulls also, who should have started a rebuild years ago, and instead were just like, no, we can do this. We can hang on. And so all they did was just wait too long and lose Alex Caruso in free agency and basically lose DeMar DeRozan in free agency, although, what did they get? A second rounder in the sign and trade? Something that doesn't really move the needle. And Brooklyn right now, we don't know which direction they're going on this because we still have a month and a half before the season starts, meaning Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson could both be gone by October 22nd, but we can't possibly know that today on September the 8th. So it makes this team damn near impossible to handicap. We will do our best, I think, right now in grading out the Nets' fantasy prospects for this season under the assumption that the guys they have on the roster right now are the guys they have on the roster on opening night. And that could very well change at literally any point during the season. But at the moment, we've kind of, there's been a quieting. I don't know that teams want Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith all that much, or at least not enough to give the Nets the type of return that they'd be looking for. Because, these players, like Cam Johnson's a decent basketball player. Dorian Finney-Smith's a decent basketball player. These guys are all mid-tier guys. They're not difference makers. Cam Johnson filling in around a bunch of superstars, yeah, he'd be solid. We saw him in a really solid role doing that in Phoenix. Dorian Finney-Smith, same kind of thing. Like, hustle stuff, guarding some people, sure. But these are not guys that a team is interested in building around. And they're not guys that a contender is interested in giving up the farm to go get. So anyway, it leaves us in this in-between, like the original Kitten Mittens. Is your team fully tanked, partway to the tank, or in between? Meow. Which is why I think we have no choice but to grade out this team as though these guys are going to be there on opening night, which then gives us this chilling challenge. Who the hell is going to do stuff on this team besides Cam Thomas? What everybody on YouTube right now is seeing on their screen is what the Nets did over the final 2 months of this past season. Cam Thomas averaged 25 points a game on about 20 shots a night. He doesn't get any defensive stats. He's a positive free throw attribute guy. He'll be positive in threes, and that's about it. He might creep into the positive in assists, but for a guard who has the ball in his hands the whole time, the assist to turnover is probably not going to be all that impressive. So let's start this show by talking about Cam Thomas, because frankly, that is probably the guy you're most interested in my take on anyway. Cam Thomas, when drafts opened a month ago, it's almost been a month already. I guess leagues or Yahoo opened a month ago with their pre-ranks, but leagues didn't open for 2 more weeks after that. Cam Thomas was pre-ranked number 92 at that point. And he was a pretty common target for analysts, myself included. At 92, I thought there was a lot of intrigue there. As you can see, down the stretch, he was number 85 this past season. Yes, there are these massive holes in his fantasy game. Defensive stats being arguably the biggest, field goal percent being arguably the second biggest. And, you can get away with one of those things probably. But if you're a guard, you kind of want steals. Like, if you're not going to be good at field goal percent, you should be okay at steals. But being bad at both does kind of cap out things. However, if he's taking 20 shots a game this year, there really wasn't anybody else you can get around 90 that is going to score that much, do that much stuff on offense, and not be a complete train wreck in both percentages. The other high-scoring guys down there have big-time issues with, I guess, the exception of maybe Colin Sexton. But on the second Yahoo board, Cam Thomas was ratcheted up, and not just a little bit, a lot of it, 2 rounds earlier. Now, not going in the end of the 8th round. Now he's going at the end of the 6th round with a pre-rank of 72. I no longer like Cam Thomas at 72 if you're not punting things. And so we can flash some of that data up on the screen as well. In fact, I think it's relevant, and I want to make sure we're towards the end of the season because that's when he was doing more stuff. If you're in a punt field goal build, Cam Thomas was number 58 down the stretch last year, and that's a pretty repeatable number for him in that particular build. If you're in a punt steals build, he jumps to number 51, which maybe that's the play here because half of your league is going to be punting field goal percent. It's way too common, and everybody's attacking the same crap. You shrink your board to this little microscopic version of what it could be by punting field goal percent. Literally everybody's doing it. Everybody. Go look at your last head-to-head league and look at how many teams actually gave a flying you-know-what about field goal percent. It's like half. It's become so prevalent that you almost have to do something different. Of course, the problem is that if you're punting steals, Cam Thomas becomes your target and the teams in your league that are punting field goal. So that's where I kind of see the problem with this. At some point, he's just going to keep getting pushed earlier and earlier and earlier, and even the punt field goal people will probably begin to price themselves out. You might fall into a punt field goal team. It's basically the Trae Young first-round pick build. Almost everybody else going in first rounds is solid to very good in field goal percent. And then maybe Wemby would be the other guy because he's a center that doesn't have a great field goal percent. But like Luka's at 49, AD's at 56, Jokic is 58 last year, Shea was 53.5, Embiid was 53. Even Jason Tatum was not a great field goal percent guy. He was at 47. KD, 52. Steph, I think in a really bad year, was he 45-ish? Halliburton, 47.5, 48. So Trae, who I still don't really like as my foundational piece, or Wemby. Those are your guys that make sense to lean into that build. And we don't even know what kind of, maybe Wembanyama kicks it up a notch in field goal percent. I don't know that going punt field goal with Wemby is the way to go. It's just the easiest thing to punt with him if you insisted on punting something. And then Trae, it's much more obvious because you could pick steals or field goal percent. And, the thing is, like, here, brief segue off to the side, we're tangential remarks on punting. Punting big man stats because you drafted Trae Young, I think, is actually the backwards way to do it. You're actually better off punting the guard stats he's not that good at, which, again, is probably steals. Like Trae Young, I get it. Sees a huge. Actually, he was okay in steals last year. What was he? Was it like 1.2? So, maybe it's not that bad this season. But historically, it hadn't been that good. You could punt the things that Trae Young's not good at, but he's a guard. So it's sort of expected that he's not that great at those. The only reason that it becomes more evident is because the guys that are the biggest positive impact in the things he's bad at that don't kill you in big man stats are the other big men going in the first round. But I do feel that sometimes we look at the punt idea wrong. Instead of punting the things that your first rounder is not good at, punt the things your first rounder is not good at that they're supposed to be good at. So Wemby, big man, supposed to be a field goal percent bump. He's not. Go the other way. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, supposed to be a good three-point shooter because he's a guard. He's not. That's what makes him a good punt. Also that he's like pretty good to great and everything else, so that clears up part of that. What's Anthony Davis supposed to be good at that he's not? Nothing, really. He's a center. You don't have to punt anything with that dude. Jokic, maybe you expected more blocks. See, he's a big man who averaged 0.9 blocks a game last year. Maybe that's the way to go. So think about it from that perspective, and maybe we need to do a show on that. And you know what? We're going to be talking Adam Stock this week, so that's probably the right time to do it. Let's go back to Brooklyn here for a moment, because basically what this comes down to for me is Cam Thomas needs like at least 20 shots a game to get near his ADP in 9-cat if you're not punting something. If you're punting field goal, you're going to be fighting with everybody to get him probably in the late 60s, and he'll be fine there. But, he's not going to be a world beater. He is, unfortunately, for better or worse, still, despite all of the possible negatives that float around, he is the most interesting Brooklyn net. Second most interesting Brooklyn net this year is Nic Claxton, but he had a super weird season last year. After climbing up into the third round, Claxton fell back to number 73. And a lot of that was, and we've talked about this a great deal on our shows during this draft season, how much value is tied up in one particular category. For Claxton, it was 2. This last year, he averaged 2.7 combined defensive stats after being at 3.4 the year before. Also, field goal percent was almost 71% when he had superstars with him. And when he didn't have superstars and just merely had some slightly above average players, his field goal percent dropped to 63. So for him, for Claxton, it was 3 categories. You could say steals, blocks, and field goal percent impact. But this is all stuff that we can't possibly guarantee is coming back. The Nets are getting worse. So if anything, his shot selection's probably going to get poorer. I don't know how much he's going to care about getting steals or blocking shots on a team that kind of stinks. He might get out to a quick start and then kind of run out of gas a little bit. But Claxton's a guy that I think has a very real chance of just repeating last year, which wasn't bad. But he's a punt free throw big man who's getting drafted in the 50s and was ranked in the 70s last year. And I know what you're thinking. Dan, I'm punting free throws, so why should I worry so much? Because Claxton was a top 30 in a punt free throw mold last season. I'll tell you why. It's because there's a bunch of guys that are getting drafted super late that you can get 5 rounds later that are going to have value pretty close to what Nic Claxton put up. What did I just say he was? He was number 27 if you were punting free throws last year. Okay, that's good. Yeah, unquestionably. But, I mean, Mitchell Robinson who only played 25 minutes a game because of injury, was inside the top 90 in a punt free throw build. And if his minutes are more like 29 this coming season, he probably gets right up there with Claxton. Jakob Poeltl was number 55 in a punt free throw build last year. Nurk, who I really don't want on my teams because I think he's due for a down year, was number 62 in punt free throw builds last season. Clint Capella was 59. Not that I want you drafting Clint Capella. Derek Lively was 82 in a punt free throw build. Trace Jackson Davis for the whole freaking season was 152 in a punt free throw build. I can go farther, man. Let's go to just the last 2 months and see how some of these guys did. Trace Jackson Davis was number 78 punt free throw. Gafford was 36 in a punt free throw over the last 2 months of the season. Claxton was 47, by the way. Gafford was better than him. Jared Allen was 34. Not even really a punt free throw guy, and he beat him. Who are some of these other guys we've been thinking about going late? Hardenstein, not late, but he was number 49 punt free throw. I'm scrolling the board. Everybody that's watching can see the names I'm coming across. I'm forgetting, let's see, we did Lively, we did Trace Jackson Davis, we did Mitchell Robinson. I'm trying to think of who those other guys are that are going in that same range. I feel like there's 4 or 5 of them in there, and now I'm forgetting a couple of the names. Walker Kessler. Where the hell was he in a late season punt free throw build? Oh, he was still 155. So that one didn't work. He's actually made his free throws down the stretch. But you guys get the meaning. There are all these guys going ultra late that were like around behind Claxton down the stretch last year, and will run you a draft pick 5 rounds later. Absolutely no reason, if you're punting free throws, to go hard on your big men early because there's a bunch of them later on. You could get one, I guess. But you got to get the stuff that your team's going to be bad at in those instances. And that's why I don't really like Nic Claxton this year, because if you're not punting free throws, I think he's a massive, massive risk to take on. And if you are punting free throws, you need to be spending your 4th and 5th round selections on guys that do the stuff that's harder to get when you start stockpiling big men. Scoring, assists, steals, threes, depending on what else you're punting here. Maybe you're punting free throws in like one other guard stat. Maybe it's free throws in threes or something. So you got to get points. You got to get assists. You can't just punt every guard stat all at once. You'll lose. But there's a beauty to this also, because as you're rumbling your way through your draft and you're collecting your De'Aaron Foxes or whoever, guys that you can grab a little bit early because they're not that great at foul shooting, just, hard target the categories that are going to be really hard. Once you get to like round 8 and then you just roll, or round 7, and then you just rattle off, Hartenstein and Capella and Mitchell Robinson and Trace Jackson Davis and Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. You can run up 5 power forward centers right in a row at the end of your draft. And suddenly everybody's like, oh crap, this team was punting free throws all along. They might not even know what you were doing. You can go Giannis, LeBron, De'Aaron Fox, and they'll think you're going hard on punt free throws, but then pivot the other way. You don't have to go Claxton in the 4th or 5th. Take the guys that score in there. Take the guys that assist, et cetera, et cetera. And then what the hell do we do with the rest of the frickin' Brooklyn Nets? Because that is, we keep getting lost in these thoughts, but I think they're important, fantasy strategy stuff. The other guys like Cam Johnson, he was a mess this past year. Just had no aggression whatsoever. He took 10.7 shots a game despite playing 28 minutes a game. Cam Johnson's a guy I would consider taking towards the end of drafts. Of course, the risk there is he gets moved. But right now, with Mikal Bridges out of the way, one would assume that Cam Johnson's field goal attempts go up from 10.7 to something. And if he gets to a dozen, he's inside the top 100. It's hard to find any stretch of time where he was doing that. Down the stretch, he only took 9.6 shots per game. But we've seen it before. That's the thing with Cam Johnson. We've seen it. He's a good steals, threes, and percentages guy when he's getting opportunity and have some confidence. And you've got to figure that with Bridges and his 14, 15, 16 shots a game out of the way, Cam Johnson will have almost no choice but to shoot a little bit more. Because Cam Thomas is going to do a lot of the scoring, and Dennis Schroder is going to do some stuff. But behind those dudes, Cam Johnson's probably the next best option on offense. Unless you think Bojan Bogdanovic is going to get shoehorned into a bunch of playing time. So Cam Johnson, not exciting, probably falls into that kind of like KCP, Gary Trent zone, but more injury prone than those guys, where, okay, take him at like 130 something, and he'll almost definitely outperform that by a couple of rounds. But is it fun? Not really. The upside with Cam Johnson is Dorian Finney-Smith gets moved, and there's just like a better guarantee that he's going to be playing wing minutes for this team. And he doesn't. Because I don't think where Cam Johnson gets traded to, anybody that's trading for him is probably going to be a good team that needs floor spacing and a little bit of defense. That's not a place he's going to get a bunch of shots. So the trade would be bad. But if they blow up other things and he's still there, that's how things are good. But man, you're threading a needle there. So Cam Johnson, I mean, pint-sized value is probably the take on him, but not really a prime target. Claxton, not really a target for me almost at all. Again, the repetition there is because he's more of a punt free throw build guy on a bad team, and you can get almost equal value out of other punt free throw guys going 4 or 5 rounds later. Almost. He's a little better. Same thing with like a Rudy Gobert. Yes, obviously he's better than Mitchell Robinson by a significant amount, but is it, once you're punting everything, is the gap large enough? And then Cam Thomas, like, you're going to be fighting against 6 punt field goal teams to get him. So even if I think he might be fun to roster with this year, which he will, because he's going to have a 50 burger mixed in there probably, he's going to end up being too expensive. I can almost guarantee it. The only other players, there's 3, actually, that deserve some time on this podcast are Dennis Schroder, Ben Simmons, and Noah Clowney. Let's start with Ben Simmons. Someone on Twitter, and there's always someone, and by the way, this is not me calling them out. It's just me noting that it happens every year, that someone's like, you got to take a shot on Ben Simmons. And I would argue you don't got to take a shot on Ben Simmons, because Ben Simmons is a shell of himself. Did any of you guys watch him play last year? Even when he was okay, the first like 8 games of the season, he's moving like a version of himself that's wearing 65-pound ankle weights. He's probably the best passer on the team. I want to try to give Ben Simmons credit where I can. He is probably the team's best passer, and he's still going to be their best shot to get a decent look on offense in a fast break. Like that part of Ben Simmons is never going to go away. But he still can't shoot. He no longer even wants to finish because he has no lift anymore. And so he's basically just boxing out and then passing. And so last year, and like it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but we'll put up the date range here just so that folks watching can see what we're talking about. Before he went down, because he did try to come back late in the season and, failed like always. He played 6 games at the beginning of the year and averaged 6.5 points, 10.8 rebounds, which is pretty good, 6.7 assists, 1.3 combined defensive stats. The steals weren't there, but you figure those come along. He shot 25% at the free throw line. He was ranked 151. You could punt free throws with him. It's not going to change much because he didn't take very many. He moves from 151 to 115. So even if you're punting free throws, it wasn't really a good look. I get it, though. If you're 13th round, fine. Like, have at it. But in a head-to-head league, you got to play all your guys. And so if they're going to give him 22 minutes a game to see if his body can survive, you have to take those, whatever he's doing. That's a great way to get off to a bad start in a head-to-head league. Now, in Roto, I think you could make maybe a tiny bit of a better argument for him because you could stash him like he's injured until you see what he looks like and what Brooklyn's doing with him. But at that point, like, there's probably somebody still more interesting on your draft board. If there legitimately is no one more interesting than Ben Simmons on your draft board, and you're just going all end of draft, games cap upside, okay, that's again, we're needle threading with this team. That's the pocket for Ben Simmons. But head-to-head, I don't see how you could possibly do it because this dude hasn't been healthy in half a decade, and he's not just magically going to be now. He's broken down, I think, physically and mentally broken down. Who wouldn't be after all this? Even if it wasn't mental to start, which I think it might have been, even if it wasn't mental to start, it almost definitely is, at least partially, that now. But again, if you can rock a games cap, whatever format you're in, and not play him while you see what he looks like, that's the way to do it. Dennis Schroder has the fantasy game of, oh man, this is messy. I really don't like Dennis Schroder's fantasy game. I really, really don't like it. He's gonna have to play though, and we have to try to weigh all that out. So down the stretch last year, Schroder was playing 33 minutes a game after the trade. He averaged 15 points, 6 assists. All that sounds delightful, but his defensive stats were basically as bad as Cam Thomas, maybe the tiniest hair better. He wasn't as helpful in free throws. He was still quite bad in field goal percent. Turnovers are going to be high because he's handling the basketball. Schroeder's always been a guy that's needed to do a lot to get to 9-cat value. And if you're punting field goal, then he makes a little bit more sense. And if you're punting a defensive stat, he makes a little bit more sense. And everybody's going to be hunting assists at the end of their draft. And maybe the Nets continue to blow things up further, and he's the last man standing. It's just Schroder, Cam Thomas, and Nic Claxton versus the universe. And then you're kind of like, all right, well, if this dude's going to be like at 18-7, I almost don't care what else he does. But it's that same thing again. Like, he's going to do more damage than good if you're in a head-to-head format. But if you're in the right punt, he makes sense as a last-round play. And if you're in Roto, this is that same thing. Like, can I sit on him to see what happens without actually using a Schroder game against the games cap? I don't like his fantasy game at all. He makes sense a little bit in points formats, and he makes sense a little bit more in 8-cat. And he certainly makes more sense if you're an 8-cat and you're punting field goal or steals. But I generally like to tailor my shows to those that are playing 9-cat and not immediately punting things. So, I mean, you get it. Basically, there's an avenue for all of these weirdos. It's just not an avenue I typically go down. And then finally, Noah Clowney, who there's almost no stretch of time that you can pull up that gives you a good look at what Noah Clowney is potentially capable of, other than looking at literally the last 3 games of the regular season. And I want to share this tab for those on YouTube. This is a basketball reference look at Noah Clowney's day-by-day from this past year. He started the final 4 games of this past season. And you could look at the final 5 games because he actually played 24 minutes in the game before that off the bench. And over the final 5 games this last year, Noah Clowney averaged 12 points, 6.5 rebounds, a 3-ball, half a steal, 2.5 blocks on 58% from the field, 73% at the free throw line. That had him ranked somewhere around 80, which, by the way, was weirdly low given the 3 combined defensive stats. But I think a lot of that is because it was a 5-game sample size. And, if you look at the entire NBA and you just looked at the last 5 games of the season, you're going to see a lot of really weird names. Guys that do or don't belong, like Patrick Baldwin. There's all these weirdos in silly season. And Clowney was a silly season weirdo last year, so we can't take anything away from him. But it's worth pointing out, he had a 7-block game against Toronto in there. He had a 4-block game against Detroit. Basically, these teams that can't shoot particularly well, that were just constantly taking it to the rim, and he was hammer blocking them out of the picture. He had a 0-block game against Sacramento, so a team that just pushed him around a little bit, and a 0-block game against New York. So, yeah, some of it was competition, but I think we can safely call him a good field goal percent guy who can actually step out and hit a 3-ball. Not a bad foul shooter. And right now, one power forward away from getting minutes at 25 probably or better. Now, again, like looking down the stretch this past year, Clowney's minutes probably higher than they would be even if one power forward gets moved. He was at 33 minutes a game the last 5 days last year when the Nets had pretty much turned everybody's ignition off. One power forward out of the way almost definitely gets him to 24, 25 minutes. Does it get him to 33? I doubt it. Two power forwards out of the way probably gets him into the 30s. So this is another little bit of an upside play. Clowney's really intriguing fantasy game. That's what we're looking at with him. Is like, you don't even have to say we see the outlines. You saw it for 5 games at the end of last year. We legitimately saw the numbers. But he's probably coming into this year looking at a 20 to 25 minute range start to the season, and that won't be enough to get him inside the top 100. And so again, it comes back to this same thing. Is top 150 good enough for your head-to-head team to sit on him until and if it gets better at some point? We assume it will. We don't know. Could be February. Might be not at all. Might be the second week of the season. We don't know when Brooklyn is going to get the offer that moves them to part with Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson or both. We don't know. And it's, again, looping all the way back to the very first thing we said about the Nets. It's what makes them, I think, the hardest team to handicap right now. We just don't know. I'd love to say take Noah Clowney with your last round pick and sit on him, but in head-to-head, you can't really sit on guys. They're part of your starting rotation. Roto, you can, but if you're at pick 135, who is the guy that you think has the best shot to move into value? Clowney's definitely near the top of that board. I'd rather have Clowney than Ben Simmons. I'd rather have Clowney than Cam Johnson on this same team. But I don't know that I feel comfortable starting any of those guys on the first day of the season. Cam Johnson, the closest in that bunch, because he's probably a starter at the very least. Oh, what a messy team. Whew, what a mess. All right, that's your Brooklyn Nets. Quick review, by the way, on the players we just talked about. Cam Thomas, probably going to end up being too expensive for anybody who's not punting steals or field goal percent. Nic Claxton has a repeatable fantasy game that you can get 4 rounds later. Cam Johnson is probably a very, very small value where he's going with minimal upside built in. Dennis Schroder, I don't really like his fantasy game. I get it if you're like hunting points and assists and don't need anything else. So he's a needle thread. I think that may need to be the terminology we use going forward. Dennis Schroeder's a needle thread for the right way to draft him. Ben Simmons is a bit of a needle thread as well for the right time to draft him. And I'm not into sewing. Not interested in Dorian Finney-Smith. He needs multiple usage guys out of the way for him to take enough shots to have fantasy value. And, again, maybe that happens. Like, maybe they move Cam Johnson and maybe they move Dennis Schroeder and then Dorian Finney-Smith is the last man left. And then you'd want to get in on that. And then Noah Clowney's the big upside play. Well, we did it, guys. We finally got through the last stinking team on team previews. It was the one I really didn't want to have to do, but obviously we have to at some point. No choice. Got to talk about the Brooklyn Nets somewhere along the way. And so today we've done it. And I hope that was in some way educational. This will likely be the only show for today. Sunday's an extraordinarily busy day for me this week. We got kids doing all kinds of crap from basically morning until their bedtime. I do still have this episode where we talked Warriors with Cyrus Satsas from the Golden Days podcast. I'm trying to figure out a way to get that sort of slotted in to the rotation here, where I'll probably do like an intro and an outro and just play the interview in the middle because it was fun and I think you guys would enjoy it. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe we can drop that at some point today. And then we loop back around to a new week. We'll do an ADP check tomorrow as well, because Mondays is when I update my free Google Sheet board. So you guys can get that. The link is in the show description. It's where I'm tracking ADPs, I'm tracking Yahoo pre-ranks, and I've also just started making up the buckets list, so that's a fun one. Reminder to please do like, rate, and subscribe on your way out. That stuff does continue to help, and feel free to comment if you have thoughts on what you want to do with the Brooklyn Nets, because as you can see, what I want to do with the Brooklyn Nets is mostly not deal with them. I'm Dan Vespers for Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Let's get this sucker wrapped up, and we'll talk to you guys probably again tomorrow, what should be another really, really fun week. Enjoy football. If that's your thing, it ain't mine, but enjoy it, and we'll just keep pumping out content. Subscribe, please. See you later.